There's good news for leaders who are trying to unlock innovation in their teams. It turns out that you don't need to be an expert innovator yourself to be able to turn your teams loose and have them operate with a lot more innovation. There is something that I think you might find that's interesting, that if you're willing to try some new things and experiment yourself, you just might find that your leadership and your management is being innovated as you try new things and learn. My name is Erik Cottrell. I'm one of the Agile transformation coaches with Agile Velocity. And in today's video, we're talking about unlocking innovation, what needs to be true to unlock it. And today we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into the leader. And so I'm going to share the board that I'm using, the Miro board that we use to help describe what we're after. And in today's episode, we're going to look in a little more detail at what it means for leaders as we begin to try to unlock these capabilities for our teams. One of the things I'm really excited about is when I come across leaders who identify areas of focus, things that they want to be able to achieve in their organizations. And innovation is certainly a hallmark that a lot of folks are after, where they're looking for new ideas, creative thoughts, novel imaginations, all in the pursuit of better solutions to meet the requirements of their customers. And some of those are known and some are not known and not articulated. And so innovation can become a powerful tool for you and for your organization, and unlocking that in your teams is very important. And so one of the questions people ask us, well, how do you do that? Well, for us, we use the path to agility. It helps us make sense of the very difficult challenge of transforming an organization. And we believe that agility offers some benefits. And so as you look at this view of the path to agility, you see 5 stages. And the status quo, when we talk to clients, a lot of times they don't have the kind of innovation that they need. It's not predictable, it's not reliable. And they want to accelerate towards a better experience with innovation. And so we recognize that transformation can be challenging. There can be some resistance and a little bit of chaos as people try to change and whatnot. And so the path to agility helps us smooth that out. And the thing that it really requires first and foremost is leadership, and having people who are willing to acknowledge that there are critical issues that the organization has to identify. And if you're watching this video, I am assuming that you're already one of those talented leaders and that you're looking for pivot points and things that can multiply your effectiveness as you begin to concentrate the actions and resources in your organizations to achieve that innovation. And at the same time, one of the things that I find is that leadership is not always that well defined. And so I've adopted David Marquet's definition. David Marquet was the commander of a submarine that he took on when it was a very low performing ship in the fleet. And he turned that ship around and he wrote a book about his experiences. And I love the beginning concept of what leadership is. And you can see it here for yourself, but it's embedding the capacity for greatness in the people and the practices of an organization and decoupling it from the personality of the leader. So understanding that our job is to embed greatness in the people and practices of our organization gives us a bit of an insight as to where we need to spend our time. And it just so happens we're going to be talking a little bit about one of the key attributes that we think is important for unlocking innovation, and that's agile leadership here. And we'll drill into that in a moment. And agile leadership, for us, it exists in the top level. We call that the org level, because transformation, as we mentioned, can be difficult. And we need all 3 levels of the organization working together. And that is the organizational level, where leadership and strategy, where the culture resides, and finance and so forth. We need that organization highly involved. We also need where the teams come together to create value. We need that to be considered in the transformation, as well as in that team level where we have stable, empowered, cross-functional teams working. And so these 3 different levels work together, but we're going to drill into agile leadership. And, you know, it's funny, agile is not always that clearly defined, and leadership, as we talked about, isn't always that defined, and put them together and describe what it is. But it really goes back to David Marquet's definition. It's how do we embed greatness into the people and practices of our teams. And so we're going to talk about that today in some detail. Let's drill into agile leadership. As we've defined it, it's that leaders are recognizing and embracing the shift in their role from directing the work to supporting their staff, enabling high-performing teams, and changing the ways they interact and lead in service to others. There's a lot packed into this. And I think what people like the most, and I certainly can appreciate that, is this notion that we want to enable high-performing teams. Like that really resonates with us for sure. And that's something that we can all agree on. That's what we're after. What can be a little bit of a change, though, is that we are shifting our role quite a bit. We're going to move from directing work, right, to supporting their staff. And so in agility, we look for ways for teams to pull the work because that's a very efficient way to get work done. And that means that we as leaders then have to, and this is oftentimes the sticking point, we have to change the way we as leaders interact and lead these teams in service to others. And so we want to make sure that when we define agile leadership, it's clear in our minds that we are shifting from a position of where we're controlling the work, we're making the decisions, we're the ones who are in control, to empowering our teams. And we covered that in the last video in a little bit of detail, but it is a big change. And so I'm not surprised when leaders struggle with this because they want to figure out how they do that. And hopefully today I'll give you a technique you can use to get some comfort about how that works. And so how do you know that this is true in your organization versus hope it's true? For us, we use capabilities that we look for to be able to identify the kinds of things that are going to be present in the leadership that we could say, we know that they are an agile leadership minded organization when they are developers of people, servant leaders, strategic thinkers, systems thinkers, and promoters of craftsmanship. And so each one of those, as I zoom out a little bit here, each one of those has more detail in it. We're going to take a look at developers of people here in just a second. But those capabilities, when they're all brought together, create a competency that we know is going to help unlock innovation in your organization. So let's take a look at developers of people in some more detail. And again, we describe it and define it here. Agile leaders are shifting in how they work with people, especially those who report to them. And so this is the reporting relationship. We shift from directing work to leading from a place of expertise to creating the conditions for success and helping guide the development and growth of the staff. It's key to empowered, engaged people in all levels of an organization. And that's really the goal. Is what we want to do is we want to ignite the entire organization with a sense that they have the ability to go solve the hardest problems, that they can go be innovative, they can come up with creative ideas. And we need to shift from we tell people what to do to we support them and encourage that. And we help them succeed as they begin to learn, to test, to experiment, and to figure out where they can apply the most good. And in the same way, we have ways of checking to see if that is actually happening. And so we're gonna drill into one here, which is the delegation portion, which is a crucial aspect of agile leadership. And so what we were aiming for here is that delegation of decision-making is defined so that those who are responsible know what they're supposed to do and what level of their fix they're supposed to reach. Oftentimes we delegate without a clear sense of what the scope is and what's in store and how it's going to be effective in terms of the boundaries that they are working within. And so we have an obligation to make sure that we're helping our people as we are giving them the responsibility to solve these problems. And I want to point out, a lot of times there's this thing about Agile, and it kind of drives me crazy. We're not asking our teams to instantly, day one, to make all the decisions and to operate completely independently. There's still the need for good mentoring, good guidance, good just inspecting to make sure that we're not going too far too fast and possibly doing some long-standing damage. Leadership still plays a very important role, and we help teams take on more and more responsibility, more and more decision-making, more and more ownership for solving these problems. So how do you do that? Right? That sounds great. So practically, how do you make that happen? And so I have for a long time used something that I think might be helpful for you. And so I always like to give some kind of a tactical thing that you can take away and start applying right away to unlock innovation for your folks. And in this case, I've borrowed something from Susan Scott. she identified this idea of a decision checklist, or I'm sorry, a delegation checklist. It's a way to be able to identify the top issues surrounding this item that is being delegated so that the person who's receiving it understands the context. The person who's delegating can also help identify where the boundaries and constraints are, and to begin to create some clarity so people know where their decision-making and ownership starts and stops. It can be beneficial then for both parties. And it can, more importantly, there can be a conversation about these questions where there is uncertainty, there's a lack of clarity, or people are not sure what things mean. So we'll just talk about a couple here. As leaders, I think it's very important for us to start to talk about the goal, the outcome, what's the result we're aiming for, what does good look like? We don't often do that enough for our folks, but that's one of the first questions. And then the second question is, what happens if this thing, this scope that we're trying to go do, what if we fail? What if we don't achieve, that great outcome? And how are we going to handle that? And is there going to be a punishment, or is this going to be taken away from us? What's expected to happen? And so we have a conversation about that. And so you can see the other questions here, but there's another question that I like and it comes to mind for me. And when I'm done and I use the delegation checklist, at the end, I always say, okay, having said all that, and we've talked about it and we're clear, now let me tell you what still worries me, right? So there's something in the back of my mind that is still nagging me a little bit. And this is what it is, blah, because it may not have fit into one of those questions. And I have a conversation. I say, this is what worries me. What do you think we can do about that? But then it dawned on me that it would be good to then turn that same question back to the team or the person to whom I'm delegating and say, okay, so what worries me, all these questions, what worries you? What are you thinking about as you take on this responsibility? And then I can hear how I can then support and become a developer of my people, right? When they tell me and they trust me with an area where they may not feel quite as competent, I can step in and provide the right kind of, allowing them to learn on their own and to try and experiment, but at the same time can be a mentor or a thought partner with them as they learn that new skill. So as we're unlocking innovation, what needs to be true is that our leadership and for us, we have to be developing our people and giving them the responsibility in the right dosage and in the right way. And so hopefully this will be something you could try with your teams and see if that doesn't help start to unlock some different kinds of conversations and starting to see some improvements towards coming up with creative, innovative ways to meet your customers' needs. All right, thanks very much. And let me point out that if you have any more questions, we'd love to talk to you. And you can go to Pt.2 or you can send us an email at info@path2agility.com. Really grateful for your time. Thank you for being a part of these series. And I look forward to talking to you in the next one when we look at whole org agility. Cheers.